The old man sat on the edge of his narrow bed, staring at the small window high up on the wall. A thin beam of afternoon light cut through the dusty air. He had been counting these beams for years now. 12 years to be exact. His name was Chen Wei, and nobody really noticed him anymore. The guards walked past his cell without a second glance. Other prisoners barely spoke to him. He had become like the gray walls around him, just there, quiet, unremarkable. But Chen Wei hadn't always been this way. The prison was located on the outskirts of the city, far from the noise and movement of everyday life. Inside these walls, time moved differently. Days blended into weeks, weeks into months. Chen had learned to accept this rhythm. He woke up early, ate his meals without complaint, and spent his afternoons reading whatever books the prison library had to offer. Mathematics, mostly. Numbers had always made sense to him, even when nothing else did. The other inmates thought he was strange. Too quiet, too calm. Some assumed he was slow in the head. Others figured he had simply given up on life. Neither was true, but Chen never bothered to correct them. What would be the point? His story wasn't one he could tell. Not yet, anyway. On this particular afternoon in 1987, something different happened. A guard appeared at his cell door with a visitor's pass. Chen looked up, confused. He never had visitors. His wife had stopped coming years ago, not out of anger, but out of pain. Watching him behind that glass had been too much for her heart to bear. "Someone to see you," the guard said flatly, unlocking the door. Chen stood slowly, his joints stiff from sitting. He followed the guard down the long corridor, his footsteps echoing against the concrete floor. His mind raced with possibilities. Had something happened to his family? Was this about his parole hearing, though that wasn't supposed to happen for another 3 years? The visiting room was small and cold. A young woman sat at one of the tables, a notebook and folder in front of her. She couldn't have been more than 30, with sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. When Chen entered, she stood up and bowed slightly, a gesture of respect that caught him off guard. "Mr. Chen," she said. "My name is Lin Mei. I'm a journalist. Thank you for agreeing to see me." Chen hadn't agreed to anything, but he didn't say so. He sat down across from her, his hands folded on the table. Years of silence had taught him to observe before speaking. Lin Mei opened her folder and pulled out several photocopied documents. Even from across the table, Chen could see the official stamps, the faded typing, the classification marks. His heart, which had been beating slowly for so many years, suddenly picked up pace. "I've been researching declassified military records," Lin Mei began, her voice careful but excited. "I found your name in several files from 1942. According to these documents, you worked in military intelligence during the war. Is that correct?" Chen looked at the papers but didn't reach for them. After a long moment, he nodded once. "These files say you were a cryptographer," Lin Mei continued, "that you helped break enemy communication codes. The documents are heavily redacted, but from what I can piece together, your work was considered extremely valuable. One report even suggests that intelligence you provided helped prevent a major attack." Chen's face remained still, but inside memories were flooding back. Memories he had locked away in a part of his mind he rarely visited anymore. He was 24 years old when the war came to his doorstep. Fresh out of university with a degree in mathematics, he had been recruited by a military officer who had somehow learned about his exceptional ability with numbers and patterns. Back then, Chen had been eager, idealistic. He wanted to help his country, to use his skills for something meaningful. The work had been grueling. Hour after hour, day after day, he sat in a small room with other cryptographers analyzing enemy radio transmissions. Most of it was routine military chatter, troop movements, supply requests, weather reports. But sometimes buried in the noise there were patterns, codes within codes, messages that meant something important. Chen had always been good at seeing what others missed. Where his colleagues saw random numbers, he saw sequences. Where they saw chaos, he saw structure. It was like music to him, a symphony hidden in static. And then came the breakthrough. A series of transmissions that, when decoded, revealed plans for a coordinated attack on a coastal city. The enemy was planning to strike at dawn, targeting not military installations but the civilian port and residential areas. Thousands of people would die. Chen and his team worked for 36 hours straight, verifying the intelligence, pinpointing the exact timing and location. The information was rushed to military command. Defensive measures were put in place. Fighter squadrons were repositioned. When the enemy forces arrived, they were met with resistance they hadn't expected. The attack was repelled. The city was saved. Chen never saw any of it firsthand. He only heard about it later in a brief classified report. No names were mentioned. No credit was given. That wasn't the point. The point was that people lived who otherwise would have died. Mr. Chen, Lin Mei's voice brought him back to the present. Can you tell me about your work during the war? Chen looked at her for a long time. She seemed sincere, this young journalist with her neat notebook and hopeful expression, but sincerity didn't change facts. His work was still classified, at least officially. And more importantly, talking about the past wouldn't change his present. That was a long time ago, he said quietly. His voice was rough from disuse. Why does it matter now? Lin Mei leaned forward. Because according to every record I can find, you were a hero. You saved lives. You served your country with distinction. So why have you been in prison for the last 12 years? The question hung in the air between them. Chen felt something shift inside his chest. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. A small crack in the wall he had built around himself. It's complicated, he said finally. Then help me understand, Lin Mei replied. Help me understand how someone who once saved a nation ended up here forgotten, with barely anyone even knowing your name. Chen looked down at his weathered hands. They had once held secrets that could change the course of battles. Now they held nothing but the weight of years in silence. Some stories, he said slowly, are dangerous to tell. Lin Mei came back the next week, and the week after that. Each time she brought more questions, more documents, more pieces of a puzzle that Chen Wei had thought was buried forever. At first, Chen said very little. He would sit across from her in that cold visiting room, listening as she laid out what she had discovered. Names of operations he hadn't heard in decades, dates that still meant something to him, even after all these years. Codes that he had helped break, written out in her neat handwriting. But slowly something began to change. Maybe it was her persistence. Maybe it was the fact that she never pushed too hard, never demanded answers he wasn't ready to give. Or maybe after 12 years of silence, Chen simply needed to tell someone what had really happened. It was during her 5th visit that he finally began to speak. After the war ended, Chen said, his voice quiet but steady. Things changed very quickly. The government was different. New people came into power. Old alliances shifted. Lin Mei nodded, her pen ready but not moving. She had learned to just listen when Chen talked. I continued working in intelligence for many years, he continued. The war was over, but the work wasn't. There were still threats, still codes to break, still secrets to protect. I was good at what I did. Maybe too good. He paused, looking at his hands again. It was a habit Lin Mei had noticed. Whenever the memories got difficult, Chen would study his hands as if they held answers. By the 1970s, things had become complicated. There were investigations, purges, accusations. People were looking for traitors everywhere. Sometimes they found real ones. Sometimes they just needed someone to blame. What happened? Lin Mei asked softly. Chen took a deep breath. My supervisor was a man named Director Huang. He had been with the intelligence division since before I joined. We worked together for almost 30 years. I trusted him. I thought he was a good man. The past tense wasn't lost on Lin Mei. In 1975, there was a security breach. Someone had leaked classified information to a foreign government. Not much, but enough to cause damage. Enough to make people angry and scared. The investigation was brutal. Everyone in our department was suspected. Everyone's life was turned upside down. Chen's jaw tightened slightly. Even now, the memory carried weight. Director Huang was questioned for weeks. His family was questioned. His finances were examined. They found some irregularities, nothing major, but enough to make him look suspicious. He was facing prison, disgrace, the destruction of everything he had built. And then he blamed you, Lin Mei said, understanding dawning in her eyes. Chen nodded slowly. He claimed that I was the one who had leaked the information. He said I had been passing secrets to foreign agents for years. He fabricated documents, altered records, convinced others in the department that I was the traitor they were looking for. But it wasn't true. No, Chen said simply. It wasn't true. Lin Mei leaned forward. Then why didn't you defend yourself? Why didn't you prove your innocence? This was the question Chen had been waiting for. The one that mattered most. Because to defend myself, he said carefully, I would have had to reveal details about operations that were still active. I would have had to name agents who were still in the field. I would have had to expose intelligence networks that were keeping people safe. He looked directly at Lin Mei, and she saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen before. Not regret, but a kind of quiet certainty. The work we did, the people we protected, the systems we built, they were bigger than me. More important than my freedom or my reputation. If I had fought back, if I had revealed what I knew to prove my innocence, I would have put dozens of lives at risk. Maybe hundreds. Lin Mei sat back in her chair, speechless. Around them, other prisoners and their visitors talked in low voices, but their table was silent. So I accepted the charges, Chen continued. I pleaded guilty to crimes I didn't commit. I was sentenced to 25 years in prison, and I never said a word about the real truth, because the real truth would have destroyed everything I had spent my life protecting. That's not justice, Lin Mei said, her voice tight with emotion. That's not right. Maybe not, Chen agreed. But it was necessary. Justice and necessity aren't always the same thing. Lin Mei shook her head, her mind racing. But Director Huang, he just got away with it? He let you take the fall and went on with his life? He retired with honors 2 years later, Chen said without bitterness. He died in 1983 heart attack. I heard about it from a guard who read it in the newspaper. Didn't you feel angry? Didn't you want revenge? Chen was quiet for a moment. At first, yes. When I first arrived here, I was angry at everyone. At Huang, at the system, at fate itself. I spent months consumed by that anger. But anger is exhausting. And what would it change? The people I had protected were still protected. The networks were still safe. My sacrifice had meaning, even if no one knew about it. How did you make peace with it? Lin Mei asked. I thought about the city, Chen said. The coastal city we saved during the war. I never visited it, but I read about it whenever I could. I learned that it had grown, that families were thriving there, that children were being born and growing up in safety. I thought about how those people existed because of the work we did, and I realized that my freedom was a small price to pay for their lives. He smiled slightly, a rare expression that softened his weathered face. Every night before I sleep, I think about that city. I imagine the lights in the windows, the sounds of people talking and laughing, the ordinary moments of life happening because they didn't die in 1942. It helps. It reminds me why I'm here. Lin Mei wiped her eyes quickly, trying to maintain her professional composure. Mr. Chen, you saved thousands of lives during the war. And then you sacrificed your own freedom to keep protecting people. That's not just heroism. That's something beyond heroism. It's just mathematics, Chen said with a slight shrug. One life for thousands. The equation made sense. But what about your family? Lin Mei asked. Your wife, your children, they've suffered too. For the first time, Chen's composure cracked slightly. His voice grew softer. That's the part I struggle with most. My wife Mei Ling, she knows I'm innocent. I couldn't tell her the full truth, but she knows in her heart that I wouldn't betray our country. But knowing and proving are different things. She's lived with the shame of being married to a convicted traitor. My son changed his name, moved to another city. My daughter won't speak to me. He paused, his hands gripping the edge of the table. That's the real price of what I did. Not my own freedom, but their pain. That's what keeps me awake at night. The guard called out that visiting hours were ending. Lin Mei gathered her papers slowly, reluctant to leave. I'm going to tell your story, she said firmly. I'm going to find a way to prove your innocence without compromising those secrets. There has to be a way. Chen looked at her with something like fondness. You remind me of myself when I was young, full of faith that the truth matters. The truth does matter, Lin Mei insisted. Yes, Chen agreed, standing up. But timing matters too. Maybe now, after all these years, the time is finally right. As the guard led him back to his cell, Chen felt something he hadn't felt in years. A small flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, his story didn't have to end in silence after all. Lin Mei spent the next 3 months chasing ghosts. She started with the obvious leads, tracking down other members of the intelligence unit who had worked with Chen during and after the war. Most were retired now, scattered across the country, living quiet lives far from the secrets they once kept. The first person she found was an elderly man named Joe, who had been a junior analyst in the same department. He lived in a small apartment filled with books and the smell of tea. When Lin Mei mentioned Chen Wei's name, Joe's face went pale. I haven't heard that name in years. he said, his hands trembling slightly as he poured tea. How is he? He's in prison, Lin Mei said directly. And I think he's innocent. Joe was quiet for a long time. He stared into his teacup as if it might hold answers. We all knew, he finally said. Everyone in the department knew Chen didn't do what they said he did. But no one spoke up. We were scared. Those were dangerous times. If you defended the wrong person, you could end up accused yourself. Can you testify to that now? Lin Mei asked. Can you say publicly that Chen was innocent? Joe shook his head slowly. I'm an old man living on a government pension. If I speak out against the official record, they could take everything from me. My pension, my apartment, my medical benefits. I have grandchildren who depend on me. I'm sorry, but I can't help you. Lin Mei left his apartment feeling frustrated but not defeated. She had expected this. Fear doesn't disappear just because time passes. The second person she tracked down was a woman named Wan, who had worked in the same building as Chen. She was more willing to talk. But her memories were fragmented, uncertain. Chen was always professional, always dedicated, Wan said. But intelligence work is secretive by nature. We didn't really know what each other was doing. I can't prove he was innocent because I don't know what he was accused of doing. The third interview went the same way. And the fourth. Everyone remembered Chen as honest and skilled, but no one had concrete evidence. No one was willing to risk their comfortable retirement to speak up for a convicted traitor. Lin Mei began to understand the trap Chen had built for himself. By keeping silent to protect others, he had ensured there was no evidence of his innocence. The very secrecy that made his sacrifice noble also made it impossible to prove. She was sitting in her small office late one night, surrounded by papers and growing more discouraged, when she noticed something in one of the declassified files, a reference number that appeared multiple times, Operation Coastal Shield. Every time Chen's name appeared in the documents, this operation was mentioned nearby. She spent the next week digging through military archives, requesting every document related to Operation Coastal Shield. Most were still classified. But she found enough to piece together the basic story, a defensive action in 1942 that had prevented an enemy attack on a major coastal city. The city was called Haimen. Lin Mei stared at the name for a long time. Then she pulled out a map. Haimen was now one of the largest cities in the country. Over 2 million people lived there. It was a thriving port, an economic hub, a place where families built lives and children grew up dreaming of their futures. And according to the declassified documents, it should have been destroyed in 1942. Lin Mei felt her heart racing. This was the connection she needed. This was the proof that Chen's work had mattered. But she still faced a problem. The documents didn't explicitly say that Chen's intelligence had saved the city. They were too heavily redacted, too careful with names and details. She needed someone who had been there, someone who could confirm the connection. She found him 3 weeks later, General Feng, retired, living in a military housing complex on the outskirts of the capital. He was 89 years old with sharp eyes and a straight back despite his age. When Lin Mei explained why she was there, the general invited her inside without hesitation. Chen Wei, he said, settling into his chair. I wondered if anyone would ever come asking about him. You knew him? Lin Mei asked, barely able to contain her excitement. I was the commanding officer who received his intelligence briefing in 1942, General Feng said. His team had decoded enemy transmissions that revealed the attack plan on Haimen. Because of their work, we were able to reposition our forces and defend the city. Without that intelligence, thousands of civilians would have died. Lin Mei could hardly breathe. Would you be willing to say this publicly? Would you be willing to testify to Chen's contribution? The general looked at her steadily. Why is this important now? The war was a long time ago. Because Chen is in prison, Lin Mei said. He was falsely accused of being a traitor and he's been there for 12 years. He never defended himself because he didn't want to compromise classified operations. But those operations are over now. The people he protected are safe, and he's running out of time. General Feng's expression hardened. In prison? Chen Wei is in prison? Yes, sir. The general stood up, his hands clenched into fists. That man was one of the finest patriots I ever had the honor to work with. If he's in prison, then something has gone very wrong. Will you help me? Lin Mei asked. Tell me what you need, the general said without hesitation. Meanwhile, back in the prison, Chen's health was declining. He had started coughing several weeks earlier. Just a small cough at first, nothing serious. But it had gotten worse. Now he couldn't sleep through the night without waking up gasping for air. The prison doctor, a middle-aged man named Dr. Wrong, had examined him several times. The diagnosis wasn't good. Years of living in the damp, cold prison had damaged Chen's lungs. He needed treatment in a proper hospital, not the basic prison infirmary. Dr. Wrong had submitted multiple requests for Chen to be transferred to a hospital. Each request had been denied. Prisoners convicted of treason weren't given priority for medical care. The assumption was that traitors didn't deserve special treatment, but Dr. Wrong couldn't shake the feeling that there was something different about Chen. The old man never complained, never demanded anything. He accepted his illness with the same quiet dignity he showed toward everything else. There was a quality about him that didn't match the crime he'd been convicted of. One afternoon, Dr. Wrong sat down next to Chen's bed in the infirmary. "You're not like the other prisoners," he said. "I've worked here for 15 years and I've never met anyone like you." Chen smiled weakly. "I'm just an old man who made some choices a long time ago." "Were you really a traitor?" Dr. Wrong asked bluntly. Chen looked at him for a long moment. "What do you think?" "I think," Dr. Wrong said carefully, "that innocent people sometimes end up in prison, and I think you're one of them." "Then perhaps you understand why I don't fight against it," Chen said. "I understand sacrifice," Dr. Wrong replied, "but sacrifice shouldn't mean death. Your lungs are failing, Mr. Chen. Without proper treatment, you might not survive another winter." Chen nodded slowly, as if this information was expected. "We all die eventually, doctor. The timing is just a detail. Your timing might come sooner than you think," Dr. Wrong said seriously. He pulled out a notebook. "I'm going to document your condition thoroughly. Every symptom, every examination, every denied request for treatment. If you die in here because of neglect, at least there will be a record." "Why does it matter to you?" Chen asked. Dr. Wrong thought about this. "Because I became a doctor to save lives, and I think your life is worth saving." That night, Dr. Wrong wrote a detailed report about Chen's condition. He included medical charts, test results, and a strongly worded recommendation for immediate hospital transfer. He sent it not just to the prison administration, but also to the regional health department. He didn't expect it to change anything, but he had to try. Across the city, Lin Mei was working late again now with General Feng's testimony recorded and documented. She had the pieces of the puzzle: Chen's wartime heroism, the city he had saved, the false accusations that had sent him to prison. Now she just needed to find a way to make people care. To make them see that a quiet old man sitting in a prison cell was actually a hero who had saved a nation. She looked at the calendar on her wall. 12 years Chen had been in prison. 12 years of silence and sacrifice. It was time for the silence to end. She picked up her phone and called her editor. "I have a story," she said, "and it's going to change everything." The article appeared on the front page of the National Morning Post on a Tuesday in March. The headline was simple but powerful: "The man who saved Hyman and paid with his freedom." Lin Mei had written and rewritten it dozens of times, choosing every word carefully. She told Chen's story without revealing classified information, focusing instead on the documented facts: the declassified operation, the city that survived, the false accusations, and the 12 years of silence. She included General Feng's testimony printed in full. The old general had not held back. "Chen Wei was a patriot of the highest order," he had said on record. "If he is in prison today, it is because our system failed him, not because he failed his country." Lin Mei expected the article to generate some interest, maybe a few letters to the editor, perhaps a small investigation by the Justice Department. She didn't expect what actually happened. By Wednesday morning, the story had spread across the country. Other newspapers picked it up. Radio stations discussed it. People began talking about the quiet prisoner who had once saved a nation. But the real change came from Hyman itself. The city that Chen had helped save 45 years earlier was now home to over 2 million people. When they read about the man whose intelligence work had prevented the attack that would have destroyed their city, something shifted. This wasn't ancient history to them. This was personal. A woman named Mrs. Liu was the first to act. She was 73 years old and had lived in Hyman her entire life. Her parents had survived the war years, and she had grown up hearing stories about the day the enemy forces came and were somehow repelled. She read Lin May's article 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Then she called her children and grandchildren. "We owe our lives to this man," she said. "We exist because he did his job well, and he's dying in prison for crimes he didn't commit." Her grandson, a university student named Wei Jun, knew how to use social media. Within hours, he had created a campaign calling for Chen Wei's release. He shared the article, added context about Hyman's history, and asked a simple question. How many of us are alive today because of what this man did? The response was overwhelming. By Thursday, thousands of people in Hyman were sharing the story. Many were descendants of families who had survived the war. They calculated that without Chen's intelligence work, their grandparents or great-grandparents might have died in the attack. They themselves might never have been born. A local teacher created a map showing where the enemy attack would have hit. The residential neighborhoods, the schools, the markets where families shopped, real places where real people had lived and died or survived because of intelligence work done in a small room by a young cryptographer they had never heard of. By Friday, vigils began appearing outside the prison. At first, it was just a few dozen people holding candles. By Saturday, it was hundreds. By Sunday, thousands. They came from Hyman, many of them traveling for hours. They brought signs with messages, "Thank you for our lives. Free the hero of Hyman. Justice for Chen Wei." The protests were peaceful but determined. Families brought their children. Elderly survivors came in wheelchairs. They sang patriotic songs from the war years. They told stories about their city and what it meant to them that someone had cared enough to save it. Inside the prison, Chen heard about the protests from the guards. At first, he didn't believe it. Why would anyone care about an old man who had been forgotten for 12 years? But Dr. Rong confirmed it. "There are thousands of people outside," he told Chen during a medical examination. "They're calling you a hero. They want you released." Chen sat on the examination table, struggling to process this information. He had made peace with dying in prison. He had accepted that his sacrifice would remain unknown. This sudden attention felt surreal, almost frightening. "I don't want to be a hero," he said quietly. "I just did what needed to be done." "Sometimes," Dr. Rong replied, "we don't get to choose how people see us. We only get to choose what we do." The pressure on the government was mounting. The vigils continued to grow. The story had captured the nation's attention. News programs dedicated entire segments to Chen's case. Legal experts began questioning the original trial. How had a decorated war veteran been convicted with so little evidence? Why had the trial been rushed? Where were the witnesses? On the 10th day of the protests, General Feng did something that changed everything. He appeared on national television for a live interview. The interviewer started with careful questions about the war, about military intelligence, about the old days. But General Feng cut through all of it. "I need to say something clearly," he announced, looking directly at the camera. "I am 89 years old. I have served my country for over 60 years. I have received medals and honors in the respect of my peers, and I am telling you now as clearly as I can, Chen Wei is innocent." The studio went silent. The charges against him were false. The general continued, his voice steady and strong. "I cannot reveal all the details, but I know enough to say with absolute certainty that Chen Wei did not betray this country. He sacrificed himself to protect operations and people that needed protection. He chose silence and imprisonment rather than risk the lives of others. That is not treason. That is the highest form of patriotism." He paused, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. "I am ashamed that I did not speak up sooner. I am ashamed that a man of such character has spent 12 years in prison, while people like me stayed comfortable and silent. But I am speaking now. Chen Wei deserves to be free. He deserves to be honored. And if this government has any sense of justice, he will be released immediately." The interview ended, but its impact was just beginning. A retired general with a spotless reputation had just called out the justice system on live television. He had used words like false charges and ashamed. He had made it personal. Within the government, panic set in. Officials began reviewing the original case files, looking for ways to respond. Some argued for defending the conviction, maintaining that the judicial process had been proper. Others recognized that the public mood had shifted too far. This was no longer about one old man. This was about national identity, about how the country treated its heroes, about whether justice meant anything at all. The Minister of Justice called an emergency meeting. Legal advisors presented their findings. The original trial had been conducted during a politically volatile period. The evidence had been questionable, and key witnesses had recanted their testimony years ago. Most importantly, several of the classified operations that Chen had supposedly compromised no longer existed. The secrets he had protected were no longer secrets. "We need to correct this," the minister said finally. Not because of the protests, but because it's right. Back at the prison, Chen was moved to the infirmary full-time. His coughing had worsened, and Dr. Rong was worried about pneumonia. The old man's body, weakened by years of poor conditions, was fighting a losing battle. Lin Mei visited him on a Wednesday afternoon, 2 weeks after her article had been published. She found him propped up in bed, an oxygen tube under his nose, but his eyes were alert. "You've caused quite a disturbance," Chen said with a slight smile. "I just told the truth," Lin Mei replied. "People did the rest." "I never wanted this attention," Chen said. "I made peace with being forgotten." "But you're not forgotten," Lin Mei said gently. "You're remembered. You're honored. The people of Hyman know what you did for them. The whole country knows now." Chen looked toward the small window where he could hear the distant sound of the vigil outside, thousands of voices singing together. "It's strange," he said softly. "I spent 12 years in silence thinking that was my fate. And now at the end there's all this noise." "It's not the end," Lin Mei said firmly. "The government is reviewing your case. General Feng's testimony has forced their hand. You're going to be released, Mr. Chen. You're going to be free." Chen closed his eyes. A single tear ran down his weathered cheek. "I don't know if I remember what freedom feels like," he whispered. "Then you'll have to learn again," Lin Mei said, taking his hand. "And this time you won't be alone. This time a whole city will be standing with you." Outside, as the sun set, the vigil continued. Candles flickered in the growing darkness. Voices rose in song. And somewhere in the government offices, papers were being prepared for Chen Wei's release. The quiet prisoner who had saved a nation was finally about to be heard. The official document arrived on a Thursday morning in April. Chen Wei was in the infirmary when the prison director came to deliver the news personally, something that had never happened in the 12 years Chen had been there. "Mr. Chen," the director said, his tone formal but respectful, "your conviction has been overturned. The government has issued a full pardon and exoneration. You are free to leave." Chen stared at him, not quite understanding. The words seemed to come from very far away. "Free?" he repeated. "Yes, sir," effective immediately. "There will be a formal ceremony if you wish, and the government is offering compensation for your years of wrongful imprisonment. But the important thing is you can go home." Chen lay back on his pillow, his breathing shallow. Free. After 12 years, the word felt foreign, impossible. He had imagined this moment so many times in the early years, but eventually he had stopped imagining it. It had seemed easier to accept his fate than to hope for something that might never come. "My family," Chen said quietly. "Does my family know?" "They've been notified," the director confirmed. "Your wife is on her way here now." 20 minutes later, Mei Ling walked through the infirmary door. She was 70 years old now, her hair completely gray, her face lined with years of worry. But when she saw Chen, her eyes filled with the same light they had held when they were young. They didn't speak at first. She simply sat beside his bed and took his hand, and they cried together, for the lost years, for the pain, for the relief that it was finally over. "I knew," she whispered. "I always knew you were innocent." "I know you did," Chen replied, squeezing her hand. "That's what kept me going." Dr. Rong insisted that Chen stay in the hospital for another week before going home. His lungs needed treatment, his body needed to recover. But now he was a patient, not a prisoner. The difference felt monumental. The government moved quickly to organize an official ceremony. They offered Chen medals, honors, a public apology from the highest levels. They wanted to celebrate him as a national hero, to show the world that justice had been served. But Chen had one request. "I want to go to Hyman first," he told the officials who came to discuss arrangements. "Before any ceremonies, before any speeches, I want to meet the people who stood outside these walls for me." The government agreed. 2 weeks later, after Chen had regained some strength, A car arrived to take him to Hyman. Lin Mei rode with him, along with Mei Ling. General Feng had insisted on coming too, despite his advanced age. As they drove through the countryside, Chen watched through the window. Everything seemed brighter than he remembered. Colors were more vivid. The sky was bigger. He had forgotten how beautiful the world was outside prison walls. "Are you nervous?" Lin Mei asked. Chen thought about this. "I'm not good with crowds," he admitted. "I've spent so many years in silence. I don't know what to say to people." "You don't have to say anything grand," General Feng said from the front seat. "Just tell them the truth. That's all anyone wants." They arrived in Hyman on a Saturday afternoon. The city had organized a gathering in the central square, the same square that would have been destroyed in 1942 if the enemy attack had succeeded. Now it was a beautiful public space with gardens and fountains, filled with people living their ordinary, precious lives. When Chen's car pulled up, thousands of people were waiting. The crowd erupted in applause. People held signs thanking him. Children waved flags. Elderly survivors stood with tears in their eyes. Chen stepped out of the car slowly, still weak from his illness. The crowd's noise overwhelmed him at first. He stood there, a small old man in simple clothes, facing an ocean of grateful faces. A woman approached, Mrs. Liu, the one who had started the campaign. She bowed deeply. "Mr. Chen," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "On behalf of everyone here, on behalf of everyone who exists because you did your job well, thank you. Thank you for our lives." Chen looked at her, at the crowd behind her, at the children playing in the square. He thought about the young cryptographer he had been, working through the night to decode messages. He thought about the decision he had made to stay silent, to accept imprisonment rather than risk lives. He thought about the 12 years in that cell, counting beams of light. "I need to tell you something," Chen said, his quiet voice somehow carrying across the square. "I'm not comfortable being called a hero. Heroes are people who do extraordinary things. I just did my job. I solved puzzles. I protected information. That's all." He paused, looking around at the faces watching him. "But seeing all of you here today, seeing this beautiful city, seeing children playing in a square that almost didn't exist, this helps me understand why I made the choices I did. You are the answer to the question I've asked myself for 12 years. You are the reason the sacrifice made sense." The crowd was silent now, listening. "I want you to know that I forgive everyone involved in what happened to me," Chen continued. "The people who accused me, the system that imprisoned me, even the circumstances that made it necessary. Because holding on to anger would have poisoned the one thing I managed to keep throughout everything, my belief that protecting innocent lives is always the right choice." He smiled slightly, that rare expression softening his weathered face. "Every one of you standing here represents a choice I would make again. Every child born in this city, every family built here, every ordinary moment of life, this is what matters. Not medals or ceremonies or recognition, just this, just life continuing." An elderly man stepped forward from the crowd. He was in his 80s with kind eyes and a gentle manner. "Mr. Chen," he said, "my name is Han. I was 7 years old in 1942. I was playing in this square the day the attack was supposed to happen. My mother grabbed me and ran when the air raid sirens went off. But we didn't know that the military had been warned. We didn't know that defenses had been prepared. We just knew that we survived when we shouldn't have." He wiped his eyes. "I've lived my whole life in Hyman. I raised my children here. I've watched my grandchildren grow up here. And I never knew until 2 weeks ago that I owed all of it to a cryptographer I'd never met. I just wanted to say thank you. And to tell you that your sacrifice mattered to more people than you can imagine." Others came forward then, one by one. A woman whose grandmother had survived, a man whose parents had met in Hyman after the war, a teacher whose students were descendants of survivors. Each had a story. Each had a connection to the city that Chen had helped save. Chen listened to all of them, shaking hands, accepting their gratitude with the same quiet dignity he had shown throughout everything. Finally, a young girl, maybe 9 years old, approached shyly. She held out a drawing she had made. It showed a man sitting at a desk working with papers and numbers, and above him was a city full of people and light. "I made this for you," she said softly. "My teacher told us your story. She said you're the reason Hyman exists. That's pretty amazing." Chen took the drawing with trembling hands. He looked at this child. this perfect representation of life continuing, of futures made possible by choices made long ago. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ling," she said. "Ling," Chen repeated. "That's a beautiful name. Can I tell you something?" She nodded. "When I was your age, I loved solving puzzles. Numbers and patterns made sense to me. I never imagined that solving those puzzles would mean anything important. I just did it because I was good at it and because someone needed it done. Do you understand what I'm saying?" Ling thought about this, that sometimes the most important things come from just doing what you're good at. "Exactly," Chen said, smiling. "You don't have to try to be a hero, Ling. You just have to do your best with whatever gifts you have. The rest takes care of itself." The ceremony continued, but for Chen, that conversation with the little girl was the moment that mattered most. She represented everything he had worked for. Innocence protected, potential preserved, the future made possible. Later that evening, Chen sat with his wife in a hotel overlooking the city. The lights were coming on as darkness fell. Millions of small lights, each one representing a life, a family, a story. "Do you have regrets?" Mei Ling asked softly. Chen considered this carefully. "I regret the pain I caused you and the children," he said. "I regret the years we lost. But the choice itself. No, I would make it again." He took her hand. "I spent 12 years counting beams of light in a prison cell. But tonight I'm counting all these lights instead. And I realize that I've been free all along. Free in the way that matters most. Free from the burden of having failed the people who needed me." Mei Ling leaned her head on his shoulder. "What will you do now?" "Live," Chen said simply. "Whatever time I have left, I want to live it fully. Maybe teach mathematics to young students. Maybe just sit in the sun and read books. Simple things. Ordinary things." "That sounds perfect," Mei Ling whispered. 2 years later, Chen Wei passed away peacefully in his sleep. He was 80 years old. He had spent his final years doing exactly what he said he would, teaching mathematics to university students, spending time with his grandchildren, and occasionally giving quiet talks about the importance of service over recognition. At his funeral, thousands of people came from Haimen. The government officials who had once imprisoned him sent representatives. General Feng, though too frail to attend, sent a letter that was read aloud. Chen Wei taught us that true courage isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet and steady. It's doing what's right when no one is watching and accepting the consequences without complaint. But perhaps the most meaningful tribute came from his students. They had collected stories from everyone whose lives had been touched by Chen's work. Not just the people of Haimen, but the agents he had protected, the operations he had supported, the countless invisible ways his intelligence work had kept people safe. They created a small memorial in the university mathematics building where Chen had taught. It wasn't grand or elaborate, just a simple plaque with his name and a single line. He solved problems so others could live. And every year on the anniversary of Haimen's survival, the city holds a quiet ceremony. No speeches or parades, just a moment of silence for all the unsung heroes who do their work in shadows, who sacrifice without recognition, who prove that sometimes the greatest acts of courage are the ones nobody sees. Chen Wei's story reminds us that heroism isn't always obvious. Sometimes it looks like an old man in a prison cell, counting beams of light and thinking about a city full of people he saved. Sometimes it's measured not in medals or monuments, but in the simple fact of lives continuing, children playing, and light-filling windows where darkness might have been. In the end, that's all Chen ever wanted, to know that his work mattered, that his sacrifice had meaning, and that somewhere in the world, people were living lives they might not have had without him. And in Haimen, under all those lights, they still are.